The city was quiet, almost eerily so, with the kind of silence that presses against your chest. Streetlights flickered along Fenway, casting jagged shadows on the brick buildings. Inside the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, the night air was warmer, but no less tense. The priceless paintings, centuries-old artifacts, and delicate sculptures seemed to hold their breath, unaware that they were about to be ripped from their homes. At 1:24 a.m., two men dressed in dark clothing slipped through the museum's side door. They had studied the layout meticulously, memorized security blind spots, and understood the guard's schedule down to the minute. Their movements were smooth, calculated, almost theatrical. One carried a flashlight, its narrow beam slicing through the darkness, illuminating the hallways like a blade of light. Upstairs, security guards Rickabath and Randy Noyes were finishing their rounds. They had been here long enough to trust the rhythm of the building, to feel the weight of history in every corridor. But tonight, that rhythm was about to be shattered. As the intruders appeared, guns drawn, time seemed to slow. "Police!" one guard shouted, a reflex born from instinct, but it meant nothing. The thieves were professionals, calm yet terrifying. They tied the guards quickly, their movements precise, rehearsed, almost attached. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes your lungs ache and your heart hammer against your ribs. Every second counted. Every misstep could be fatal. Outside, a black van waited, engine running, ready to whisk the stolen treasures away into the shadows. In the next 81 minutes, 13 pieces of art vanished. Thieves cut paintings on their frames with meticulous care, leaving dozens of other masterpieces untouched. It was not greed that dictated their selection. It was obsession, knowledge, and an intimate understanding of the collection. The Vermeer, the Rembrandt, and the Degas were gone, leaving behind gaping frames that stared blankly at the marble floors. The guards watched helplessly. Their world, once orderly and familiar, was now a crime scene beyond comprehension. Outside, Boston slept unaware, while inside, history was being rewritten in the quietest, most deliberate way imaginable. By dawn, the authorities arrived. At first glance, the museum seemed untouched. The marble floors gleamed, ornate walls stood proud. But the emptiness was palpable. Gaping holes replaced masterpieces, the silence of loss echoing louder than any alarm ever could. Detectives combed through the scene, fingerprints lifted, notes collected, security footage scoured. Yet the trail was cold. Weeks into the investigation, the trail remained maddeningly empty. No ransom demands, no black market transactions, no credible tips. And then a single fragment surfaced, a scrap of canvas from a Rembrandt, discarded like a taunt to law enforcement. Fingerprints on it matched no known criminals. The piece was deliberate, a challenge left by someone who knew the art, the museum, and the law itself. Suspicion immediately turned inward. Could this have been an inside job? Someone who knew the guard schedules, the building's every nook and cranny, the priceless selection of artworks? Investigators interviewed staff, former employees, and even museum patrons, trying to connect dots that seemed deliberately scattered. Every answer seemed to lead to more questions, each clue raising shadows darker than the last. Then came the first breakthrough. A nearby building security footage, long overlooked, revealed a man entering the side door minutes before the alarm was triggered. He carried only a small bag, but his movements were deliberate, confident. Whoever he was, he knew the museum as well as anyone on staff. Someone was playing a game, and the FBI realized the stakes were higher than anyone had imagined. The final shock came when detectives discovered a missing staff member, gone without a trace the night of the heist. No calls, no explanations, nothing. Was this person involved, coerced, or worse, targeted? Whispers of betrayal began circulating among investigators. The case was no longer simply about stolen art. It was about trust, obsession, and the terrifying possibility of someone inside orchestrating everything. In the dead of the night, investigators opened a rarely used basement door. What they found inside changed the entire perspective of the heist. A hidden compartment, slightly ajar, containing a torn note marked with an unfamiliar signature. Whoever left it wanted the authorities to see it, to know that they were being watched. A message, a challenge, and a hint that betrayal ran closer than anyone had suspected. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist was no ordinary crime. It was a puzzle crafted with obsession and executed with cold precision. And now, with the first hints of motive and betrayal emerging, the investigators realized they had stepped into a game where every player could be both ally and enemy, and the shadows held more than stolen paintings. They held the truth, waiting to be uncovered. The torn note found in the museum's basement wasn't just a clue. It was a declaration, written in hurried, almost frantic scrawl. It suggested that someone inside the museum had orchestrated more than just a theft. Investigators pored over it in sterile offices, under harsh fluorescent lights, trying to decode every letter, every mark. Each possibility felt heavier than the last. Could a trusted employee really be capable of such audacity? For Detective Harold Wexler, the case was personal. He had seen countless thefts in Boston, but none with the precision, the cold elegance of this heist. He walked the halls of the Gardner every day, memorizing every doorway, every shadowed corridor, trying to imagine the path the thieves had taken. And the more he thought about it, the less it made sense. There was no trace, no hasty mistakes, no signs of panic, just empty frames and a trail that seemed to mock the authorities. Suspicion began to focus on a small circle of museum staff. One name kept coming up: Thomas Burns, a security technician who had worked for the museum for nearly a decade. Burns was meticulous, obsessive about cameras, alarms, and schedules. He knew the museum better than anyone else. Yet colleagues described him as reliable and unassuming, the last person anyone would suspect. But reliability, as Wexler knew, could mask obsession. Weeks into the investigation, the FBI received an anonymous tip. A voice, distorted and cold, whispered details about the heist that only someone inside could know. The placement of alarms, the guards' routines, the exact frames chosen by the thieves. It was enough to narrow the list of suspects to a handful, but also introduced danger. Whoever was speaking could be watching every move of the investigators. Meanwhile, the trail of the stolen art remained cold. Despite exhaustive checks with black market dealers, auction houses, and private collectors, no pieces surfaced. It was as if the art had evaporated, leaving only shadows behind. But small, unsettling signs emerged: anonymous calls in the dead of night, cryptic messages, a surveillance when spotted near the homes of key investigators. The game was escalating, and now it was personal. Burns' life came under scrutiny. Detectives discovered unexplained bank transactions, odd late-night absences, and a connection to a former art dealer with a murky reputation. But nothing directly tied him to the heist. Yet, every time investigators thought they were close, the trail twisted, leading them to more questions than answers. Who could be trusted? Who was manipulating the scene from behind the curtain? As days passed, tension in the city rose. Media outlets dubbed it Boston's greatest unsolved crime. But inside the investigation room, it was far more than a headline. It was a race against time. Wexler and his team worked around the clock, running fingerprints through every database, tracing financial records, interviewing anyone remotely connected. Yet the deeper they dug, the more complex the web became. Then came the breakthrough nobody saw coming. A janitor working late in the museum discovered a hidden ledger tucked behind a false panel in office. The ledger contained detailed notes, dates, names, and cryptic codes, suggesting someone had been planning the heist for months, maybe years. The handwriting didn't match Burns. It was older, steadier, practiced. Someone else was pulling strings behind the scenes. The investigators realized the heist had multiple layers. The visible players, the two men in black that night, the possibly complicit staff member, were only the tip of the iceberg. Someone higher up had orchestrated the entire operation, ensuring the right pieces were removed, the others untouched, and the guards neutralized without unnecessary violence. It was as elegant as it was terrifying. Danger escalated when an unmarked envelope arrived at Detective Wexler's office. Inside was a photograph of the museum, taken from across the street at night, with the two guards visible inside, bound and terrified. Scrawled on the back, "We're always watching." The message was clear. The thieves, or someone connected to them, were taunting law enforcement, playing a game with deadly stakes. The investigation team began to fear that the missing staff member from the night of the heist wasn't gone by choice. Could they have been silenced? The thought sent chills through every agent in the room. If someone was willing to orchestrate a $500 million heist with military precision, what else were they capable of? The stakes had escalated from theft to threat. Finally, a late-night tip led Wexler to a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of Boston. Surveillance footage confirmed unusual activity. Heavy crates being moved in and out, and lights flickering at odd hours. Could this be the resting place of the stolen masterpieces? Or was it another trap designed to mislead investigators and waste their resources? As the detectives prepared to move in, a single unsettling fact gnawed at them. If the ledger, the note, and the photograph were accurate, someone on the inside was feeding the heist from within. Betrayal was no longer just a theory. It was reality. Every move they made could be anticipated, manipulated, or worse, punished. And then came the twist that shook the investigation to its core. In one of the office drawers in the warehouse, they found a letter addressed to the missing staff member. The words were chilling. If you step out of line, you disappear. If you obey, you live, but not for long. The paintings are just the beginning. It became painfully clear that the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist was not just about art. It was about control, obsession, and power. The shadows around Boston deepened. With every clue discovered, the network of betrayal, obsession, and danger grew more intricate. The stolen masterpieces were just the first act in a performance of greed and cunning that nobody could have anticipated. And just when the detectives thought they had narrowed the suspects, a new revelation arrived. A cryptic phone call intercepted by the FBI. The voice, familiar yet chillingly disguised, said 3 words that would haunt every agent. You're too late. The hunt was no longer just for stolen art. It was a race for survival, for truth, and for justice, in a game where every shadow could hide an enemy, and every ally could be the mastermind. The cryptic phone call haunted Detective Harold Wexler and his team. You're too late. Those 3 words replayed in his mind, echoing through the sterile hallways of the FBI office, cutting through every rational thought. Whoever had orchestrated the Gardner heist was always ahead, always watching, always manipulating. Time was running out. The warehouse on the outskirts of Boston had already revealed more than anyone expected. Heavy crates, hidden compartments, and notes hinting at an obsession that went far beyond stolen paintings. But now, thanks to an anonymous tip from a local informant, Wexler and his team learned the final piece of the puzzle: the identity of the mastermind behind the heist. It was Thomas Burns, or at least, that's what everyone had assumed. The twist, however, was that Burns was not the true architect. He was a pawn, carefully groomed and manipulated by someone who had studied him for years. Isabella Gardner's own distant relative, Eleanor Whitaker, a recluse known for her eccentricity and obsession with the family legacy. Whitaker had spent decades obsessed with the museum, studying every guard schedule, every security system, every detail of the collection. Her goal was simple but terrifying. She wanted to reclaim in her mind the family's rightful treasures, but not for public admiration. She wanted control, power, and the thrill of watching law enforcement scramble while her vision came to life. Detectives moved cautiously toward Whitaker's estate, an isolated mansion surrounded by dense woods, the perfect hiding place for someone who lived in shadows. As they approached, a sense of foreboding settled over them. The mansion was silent, imposing, with windows like eyes staring down from the darkness. Every step closer felt like stepping into a trap meticulously crafted over decades. Inside, they found Eleanor Whitaker in her study, surrounded by blueprints, photographs, and the remaining stolen paintings. The air smelled of aged paper and varnish, intoxicating yet oppressive. Whitaker greeted them calmly, almost cheerfully, as though expecting their arrival. "You found me," she said softly. "Congratulations, but you're too late to save them." Her composure was chilling. She spoke of obsession, of art, of power, as though she were lecturing a student rather than confessing to a $500 million heist. She explained how she had used Burns and the 2 masked thieves as instruments in her plan, orchestrating every movement from behind the scenes. She had anticipated every investigation, every media report, every misstep by law enforcement. In her mind, she had already won. But Whitaker's confidence was her weakness. FBI agents and Boston detectives had prepared for months, anticipating every move, every trap. They carefully coordinated the arrest, moving in silently. Whitaker, realizing she had miscalculated, attempted to flee toward a hidden passage behind the mansion's library, but she underestimated the meticulous planning of the investigators. Within moments, she was apprehended, handcuffed, and led out into the cold night. The stolen paintings were recovered, though not all were intact. Some bore scratches, minor tears, or smudges from hurried removal and transport. But the masterpieces were safe, and the museum's collection, though battered, could begin to heal. Investigators cataloged every piece, documenting the details as they prepared for the long process of restoration. Yet even with the recovery, the aftermath revealed a deeper darkness. Burns, once thought guilty, was devastated by betrayal, realizing he had been manipulated by someone he had trusted, and someone who had obsessed over the museum for years. The missing staff member, the janitor, and even the anonymous informant all played roles in a drama that spanned decades. Every player had been pawns, manipulated by Whitaker's brilliance and obsession. The Gardner Museum itself bore scars from the heist, both physical and emotional. Security was upgraded, staff trained anew, and public tours resumed, but the shadows of that night lingered. Patrons walked past the empty frames that once held priceless art, and many whispered stories of mysterious disappearance and a mastermind who had almost rewritten history. In court, Whitaker maintained her calm, almost regal demeanor, describing her actions as an art of passion, not crime. Yet the jury saw the danger, the obsession, and the betrayal. She was sentenced to decades in federal prison, a lifetime in the shadows she had once mastered. Even then, her influence lingered. Investigators later found journals detailing other schemes, hints of plans never executed, an obsession that refused to die. The final twist arrived months later, long after the trial ended. A small package arrived at the museum, a single and signed postcard depicting the empty frames. Written on the back, "Art is never truly gone. It watches. It waits." Even in her imprisonment, Whitaker's legacy, obsession, and the darkness she cultivated continued to haunt the halls of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. The heist was solved, the mastermind captured, the art returned. But the story left a mark deeper than the loss of paintings. It revealed how obsession can twist brilliance into destruction, how betrayal can hide behind the most trusted faces, and how shadows often conceal more than we dare to imagine. And as Detective Wexler left the museum one last time, walking past restored frames on the quiet Boston night, he whispered to himself, "History may remember the art, but it will never forget the shadows behind it." The Isabella Stewart Gardner heist was over, but its lessons, its twists, and its darkness would linger forever.